I think the biggest opportunity for growing a podcast right now, where it isn't paid, is organic posting from the host profile, not the company profile, not the page of the podcast, from the host profile about each episode. And there's a few things optimizing this for 6 months. So this is what works for me. Hello and welcome to Confessions of a B2B Marketer. You are listening to your host, Tom, but this episode is me being a guest on Tom Watley's show called Mixtapes. We dig into pretty much everything I know about the podcasting strategy and also a bit about the business fame. So if you're interested in podcasts or if you're interested in building/bootstrapping a B2B company, then I hope this episode is going to be of value to you. So let's jump into that right now.
Tom, thank you ever so much for joining me today. For people who don't know, you're the founder of 2 SaaS companies and an agency, all focused on B2B podcasting. And following your journey, it seems like the SaaS businesses came first and the agency came later. Now, many people think that I'm mad for starting an agency, but as someone who went through the journey of building something more quote unquote scalable, some people might think you're a little bit mad getting into the services world. So why did this SaaS founder get into the agency game?
So SaaS companies, I'd say one was a marketplace, and then we actually iterated on a shitload of other little SaaS products. So none of them worked that well. The reason, I think, because Einstein is like the definition of insanity is just trying to do the same stuff over again and expecting different results. So I think what happened is I really wanted to make the entrepreneurship thing work because I can't be employed because I'm a horrible employee. And so I guess after trying for like 5 years doing it wasn't just asking, but I tried to do it absolutely a shit ton of things. And the agency thing is the only one that's worked actually quite well. It was really a sense of how can I make this entrepreneurship thing work? I kept trying different things until I found one that now seems to be working quite well.
Okay, interesting. So it was a matter of, look, I cannot go back to the world of full-time. I need to build something. And I guess already being in the podcast world, this made sense, right? Was it like a natural progression into this productized service that you've built?
The background in podcasting, I actually think stems from childhood. We used to drive to France or Spain in the car from England to go on holiday with my family. I remember we either used to listen to the cricket or we used to listen to audiobooks like in the car. And I remember just absolutely loving that, like wanting to stay in the car to finish the cricket, etc. I think I've always loved audio. And then in one of these SaaS companies you mentioned, the marketplace called Virtual Valley. It was like Upwork, but for Filipino virtual assistants, didn't really work. But one thing that worked quite well from that experience was a podcast I started, which was actually a daily show, a daily solo podcast where I was like narrating the journey of the company. Absolutely crazy idea, but I think I did it for 6 months. Built a decent audience, and that was like maybe wasn't more financially successful than the SaaS company, but I guess I had more fun. It was like a super interesting journey. So that's the background in podcasting. And then the origin story of fame is that I was actually employed as head of demand generation at a B2B SaaS company. We started a podcast. I was the host. Long story short, it was very profitable for my employer. So I left. They became the first client of fame, still a client today, kicked me off from being a host. But they're very good to still want to be a client, even though I was like leaving their company. So shout out to Ebster.
Ebster, fair enough. Yeah, they gave you the room to move on, grow, but still pay you for it.
Exactly. And I'm eternally grateful. If anybody needs any revenue intelligence software, go to ebster.com.
Okay, I'll put it in the show notes. So I'm a customer of Bcast, right? So Making Mixtapes is run on Bcast. And as far as I know, you're still running it because my podcast is still live. Did you build this after fame then?
Still concurrent in that initially the agency was more just to replace a salary so I could work on more scalable businesses. And so at the same time, the ethos behind Bcast was the strategy to bootstrap a SaaS company, which is you basically find a growing market and then you take a smaller slice of that. And then in theory, because the market's there and it's growing, you don't have to create any demand. The demand is there. And then you can beat the incumbents because you're more specific to a specific customer persona. That was the theory behind Bcast, and we were just like business podcasts or like podcasts for like high growth podcasts, etc. And it was going well, like we launched, and it still is going well. And it's instrumental to the growth of Fame. All Fame podcasts went on Bcast. But the revenue of Bcast is probably like 5%, maybe less than that, of the revenue of Fame. And so that is equal to my time investment as well. So I'm like 90% or 95% on Fame versus the rest on Bcast. And so it kind of happened at the same time. And Bcast is very important to fame. But in terms of the revenue split between the two, the majority is the agency.
Technology is often a tremendous, unique value proposition for agencies. Do you find that having the technology to say, we've built this for our methodology, so we'll put you on here while we run the service, do you find that helps with selling Fame's services?
I think it helps more if you keep the application like proprietary, so only Fame clients can use it, but that's not the case. We actually have another one called Apney, which is like the AI show notes writer. Obviously, anybody can use those tools, so that reduces the value prop a bit. What I think it does show, though, is that to potential clients, is that you're like embedded and passionate and know a lot about the industry if you've been able to build tools that are being used by a lot of people. I think it does help. The second thing, especially with a SaaS product where there's like significant virality or SEO benefit, and you can piggyback on the domain authority of Bcast, which is 71 according to Ahrefs. It's only like 3 to 4 years old. And so we can rank for terms and that help with Fame. If it can help, we can also rank for terms that help get exposure for our client podcast as well. So that's indirect benefits of having the SaaS company attached to the agency, but it does help with selling as well.
Yeah. You've created your own distribution channel for clients there, essentially, through search.
Yeah, pretty expensive one.
Yeah, I can imagine. Do you find that clients come to you after using Bcast? They've built their own podcasts and they're like, fuck it, let's get these guys to do it for us.
I think Bcast bringing clients for Fame.
Yes.
I think it happened only once, and Bcast has had thousands for 3,000 users. It's a slightly different persona, I think. It's more like solopreneur type small businesses, whereas Fame's ideal customer has like more than 100 employees.
Yeah, okay. That makes sense. I'm definitely in the Bcast segment right now. Amazing, man. Your podcast agency Fame is behind what I think are some of the best B2B podcasts in the world. Tell us a little bit about your methodology there.
Theory behind Fame's podcast methodology stems from the origin story. So we'll go back to that. I joined that company, and when you join any big company in marketing, you have to learn about who you're trying to sell to. And so I was reviewing the customer persona of the sales software, and one of them was sales operations. I was like, well, the person who is responsible for the ops and therefore choosing tech for sales teams, obviously that's one we should maybe focus on more. I reached out to loads of people cold on LinkedIn to see if they'd jump on a call with me so I could learn about them. Obviously, I got ignored. So the masterstroke was to start sales operations demystified. And so all we would do is focus very specifically on sales operations, and the kind of edge or the different thing about our show was that we just talk about their careers. We have the niche and we have the edge. So we're getting into podcast theory now. And then all we did then is we executed like pretty relentlessly for 6 months, probably did about 50 interviews, closed a big deal with one of the guests. And so therefore the business now is ecstatic with the show. The podcast paid for itself over 6 months. And so then all we needed to do was improve my hosting skills, improve the production, increase the episode frequency, and then we built the audience, which was the real asset. So what did we do right there? We got the positioning right with the niche and the edge. We got the timing right because sales ops was just becoming a thing back in 2018. And then we're consistently executing, and we were strategic about guests. All of those things led us to build this valuable asset now, which is a group of people that know, like, and trust Esther, so that when they need the 3 months out of every 5 years, when they might need some new revenue intelligence software, they, in theory, and do go to Esther because they know, like, and trust them. That's the theory of how can we build a group of people that know, like, and trust our clients so that when they need their service or software in the small buying window, they go to them. And so the way we do that is execute consistently, be strategic about positioning, be strategic about guests. And that's what I think we did well on that sales ops show, which is still running today, but it's no longer focused on sales ops.
Okay. What does it focus on now of interest?
It's called the Revenue Intelligence Show. I haven't listened to an episode in a while. I boycotted listening to it after I got kicked off.
Fair enough, but yeah, just making a point. You mentioned podcast theory just a second ago, getting the niche and the edge right. And I think we all know what a niche is. What do you mean by the edge?
Yeah, the best way to understand the edge is the thing that your listeners would tell their friends about. So quickly just do another example, Confessions of a B2B Marketer. Obviously the niche is very clear, B2B marketing. And then the edge is, I need to get better at it, but it's the confessions piece. It's like trying to get people to share stuff that maybe they wouldn't normally share. And so that's the thing that listeners would tell their friends about. Those two things, the niche and the edge, make up the positioning of the show.
Okay. Someone who's looking to get into the podcast game for the first time, how do they find their edge? How do they find something unique, especially as the channel's getting more and more saturated? Well, not channel, the art, shall we call it, for lack of a better word.
Yeah, to make this, because we have this exact, we like run through, when we bring on clients that don't have a show, we like run them through this and ask them questions to try and work out what that is. So let's just run through some of the questions. Sometimes, I'll give an example. We had a client who the culture of their business is very focused around pancakes. So they would like always have pancakes on the days, the party days, etc. They always talk about pancakes. And they also sell mobile application growth software. And so we call their show, one way of creating an edge is something that is like unique about you or your brand. So we call that show Mobile Growth and Pancakes. The final question of every episode was, what's your favorite pancake topping? And then they'd also send any guests that came on that were like local, they would send them the pancakes to them after the fact. That's just one, maybe not the most effective way of creating the edge, but that's one way. Probably the best way to create the edge is to ask the question, what is the one thing that you believe that most people don't believe about your niche? And then you can build the show around that. A very famous example here is the state of demand gen. That will actually change that to Randy ID or whatever he calls the show now. But Chris Walker's show used to be called State of Demand Gen. And he had a very unique perspective on B2B marketing, etc. That was the edge of his show. It was B2B marketing, demand generation was the niche, and the edge was the fact that I can't remember what it is now, but it's very strong. So that's one other example.
Yeah, it's all about dark social and all of that stuff. At least it was back then, I believe.
Exactly right. And so let's see if we've got any other ones. So yeah, controversial or unconventional beliefs, quirks or weird things about your business, or yeah, something that most people think in your market that you disagree with. So yeah, there isn't like a clear playbook on how to define that, but you can ask these questions to get closer to what it could be.
Yeah, it's coming up with a handful of the right questions and digging deeper into it. It almost sounds like you're conducting customer research, customer interviews, but from the perspective of what is the deep philosophy that we have as an organization, or maybe even as an individual, when you look at folks like Chris Walker, right? You mentioned that you get strategic about the guests that you get on podcasts as well. How do you usually go about that? How do you go about guest selection, but also making it as appealing as possible for your guests to jump on a podcast? Again, especially as this medium is becoming more and more saturated.
Yeah, so 3 criteria for guests is and we have to do number 1, and 2 and 3 are a bonus. Number 1 is, can they add value on the topic? Number 2 is, could they be a potential partner or customer? Number 3 is, do they have an audience? And so it's actually quite rare that you'll get all 3.
I was going to say, yeah, trifecta.
Yeah, we definitely need number 1, and then 1 and 2, and then 1 and 3 would be a bonus. So that's criteria. I think with 2, like customer or partner, obviously you can't like pitch guests that come on, but the way humans build relationships is relationships are built as you experience emotions together. The process of being invited, not sure if you're going to do it, being a bit nervous, recording, feeling great afterwards, feeling even better when it's released is like an emotional roller coaster, and you build bonds with people as you go through that process. And so whenever that happens, that can be valuable if that person then in the future needs your product or service. You can't really pitch because then they just think you only brought them on to pitch to them. But if you get it right, you can build those relationships with people, then ultimately they'll come to you in theory because you have that relationship. And that works for people that could be customers and people that could be partners. So that's number 2. Second part of your question was about convincing guests. Yeah. So I'm going through this right now with Confessions of a B2B Marketer. Only recently have really started to get like big time guests, like CMOs of Slack and Active Campaign, etc. The way it's just social proof. You have to get lucky at the start. You have to find someone that probably is in your network, or you know someone that knows someone, so they'll take a chance on you. And then as soon as you do that, it gets 1% easier to get the next one. And then you keep going and you keep going until you have a guest pitch where you say 3 massive names that the person you're trying to get on knows, and ideally has lower status than. Because if you see someone that has higher status than you've already been on, then you say, yeah, I'll do it. So it's really just developing social proof and then climbing the ladder. And it does take time. Like it's taken 90 episodes to get the CMO of Slack, ex-CMO of Slack on my show. So it does take time, but you just have to keep trying.
Yeah. One of the earliest guests for this podcast was Rand Fishkin of XMoz and SparkToro. And honestly, it was just a matter of timing. I'm a customer of SparkToro, sent out an email asking for thoughts and perhaps a case study. And I said, Rand, I'll give you a case study if you come on my new podcast from about to launch. And he said, yes. Do you think that timing has a lot to play into it as well?
Timing for sure has a lot to play in it. The other thing that's interesting as well is because Rand, absolute legend, he's an incredible podcast guest, but he does it a lot. And so the more scarcity drives value, right? The value of the guest is inversely proportional to how many podcasts they go on. It's just an interesting observation I've had with podcast guests.
How do you determine the value of a guest then in that regards?
I think it's the three principles we discussed. The guest is obviously very valuable if they're going to create information that your audience is going to love. They're more valuable to you if they could be a customer partner, and they're more valuable to you if they're an engaged audience that they might share to.
Yeah, absolutely. You said a few moments ago that consistency is key. And I know a lot of people think that or find it to be quite difficult. Other than hiring an agency like Fame to do it for them, do you have any habits or principles that people can stick to in order to get past that 20 episode mark?
Yeah, I think we call it a project manager. I think this role is very crucial for anybody running a podcast. So let's just give an overview. It could be someone remote. It can be someone I think the Philippines is a great place to do it, but it could be anywhere. Obviously, they have to speak your language effectively. And this person might cost anywhere between $10 or $20 per hour. And their job is to make the podcast happen. At the start, if the podcast is small, they're probably doing guest outreach. They're managing the people that are creating the assets. They're responsible for social posting. But really, you want them to project manage you as the host. And so if you have that person in place, then it's much more likely you're going to be able to keep consistent. There's probably three key things to talk about here. First, documentation. Second is project management software. Then is communication protocols. There should be one Google Doc, which is the working procedure or whatever you want to call it for the podcast. And that explains exactly how the podcast is run. Now, as you get bigger or more complex, maybe there'll be a working procedure for guest outreach, for editing, production, and for promotion. We'll start it with one. So that's the first thing. And this person, as a process of being defined, they're documenting them. So it's all in one place. It's also great. So if that person leaves, it's very easy to onboard and train because everything's there. Second is project management software. So you want one place where you can go and see like the status of all the different things. We use Trello, it could be anything. And then third is probably just like communication protocol. Typically, maybe there's like a Slack channel just for the podcast. Only the people that are working on the podcast in that Slack channel, there's rules about how you communicate and when. Maybe you have a 15-minute meeting every week where the project managers can update you on the status of the show. There's like a predefined agenda for that. And that agenda is populated, so you just turn up, they answer any questions. That's like the ideal. If you have that all set up, you as the host, all you're going to have to do is turn up, perform, upload the assets, review the assets. Maybe you're involved in guest outreach, but you'll be much more likely to be consistent if you do that.
Amazing. That is such a wonderful, detailed answer. Yeah, having someone just hold you by the hand and make sure that you do the shit that you're supposed to do or do it for you.
Yeah, ideally. Because then you have the energy then to prep for the show, be energized on the show, and then obviously do everything else that you need to do in your work life. Because I'm assuming most people that have a B2B podcast probably do something else as well.
Yeah, of course. Exhibit A right here. And B as well. Going back to distribution. So you said Bcast is a very expensive distribution channel, very tongue-in-cheek. I noticed that you're a huge proponent of repurposing content and giving podcasts its own presence on channels like LinkedIn. What is your philosophy when it comes to repurposing podcast content and extending the half-life of any given episode?
Yeah, I think the biggest opportunity for growing a podcast right now, where it isn't paid, is organic posting from the host profile, not the company profile, not the page of the podcast, from the host profile about each episode. And there's a few things optimizing this for 6 months. So this is what works for me, is I pick out the thing that's like a little bit weird, striking, controversial from the episode. That's normally the hook of the post. Then I'll elaborate on that a bit, maybe even give some value in the post. And then tagging the guest, obviously tagging the guest business, although I've been informed yesterday, I did it yesterday. I tagged the guest and the guest business, CMO of the active campaign, tagged that campaign as well. And then I've got a LinkedIn coach now, and he's don't do that because if they don't engage in the first 30 minutes on the post, if you tag people, then you get deprioritized in the algorithm. So that's a hot tip, guys. Next time, I'm going to maybe write the post and then in US, because they're US, so they were never going to engage when I posted that in UK morning time. Anyway, so that's like a quick insight. And then the thing that I've been doing, which I think there's theory behind why it works, I don't know if it works in real life, is I always just add an image of myself and the guest. The reason for that is I want to show the world that I'm associated with these people. So some of their status rubs off on me. It's like the CMO Slack is like on the show, then there's pick of me, what is a LinkedIn with him, then that in theory increases my status, making me more influential. I do that for every episode. We release an episode every week, that post. We get a percentage of the guests that comment, share, etc. And that I think is probably for my show, the biggest driver at the moment the posts get anywhere between 1,000 and 20,000 impressions. So I'm trying to increase that, but that's like completely free. That's the first piece of repurposing that everyone needs to do. Make sense? Second piece is bonus points to create the company page for the show. It has to be a company page, not a showcase page. What this means is that you can then tag in all your posts. You can then tag the page. It's another place for people to follow the show. What you'll find if your show is good is that other people start tagging the show so they write a LinkedIn post about the top side podcasting, B2B marketing, etc. They'll start tagging you. Guests will start tagging you. And then what you'll start doing is building up this audience. We only have just over 1,000 followers on the page for Confessions of a B2B Marketer. And then every day we post a snippet with like very simple copy, headline, tag guest business, custom hashtags. And that, so every day we're getting a tiny little spike of new people coming and getting the show, seeing the show. Also, and other opportunities for the guest and the guest business to share your stuff. We then actually so I write that post every week for the new episode. A week later, that gets posted on the podcast company page. So we repurpose that as well. Right now, that's pretty much all the repurposing we do on social for my show. I think what most people get wrong with any social strategy is that they go too wide and they never get anything to work. Now we just spent 6 months really trying to get LinkedIn organic to work better. And then next up, we might choose a different one and try and make that work as well.
Amazing. Yeah, taking an experimentation approach to it.
Yeah, for sure.
Lots of gems there, Tom. Lots of gems. Giving away the farm. Where do you think people fuck up when it comes to promoting their podcast? Where do you think people trip up and make some blindingly obvious mistakes?
I think the biggest one, we get some clients a lot, is they expect big downloads when they're creating bottom of the funnel content. So they might start creating content that's like talking about their product or service, like basically a case study. And then they're like, why are the downloads not going up? It's because clearly only a tiny percentage of people in the world are interested in that, the people that are within 2 weeks of buying your product or service. And so if you want to grow and have a top of the funnel piece of content, then you cannot talk about your product or service in the content. You can put ads in, obviously, around the content. So that is just understanding, if you want this to be a case study show, great. You're not going to get a load of downloads and it's going to support the sales process. That's fine. That's just really important and quite obvious. You'd think that people would understand that. That's number one. Number two is, as I mentioned, with organic social, creating stuff and trying to have they think they'll get more attention just by being on all 4 platforms. They won't. You're just a bit stupid because you have no engagement on any of them. Choose the one that has the most of your ideal listeners first. Most B2B shows is LinkedIn. Optimize that and then go on to the next. So that's the second one.
Yeah, absolutely. I didn't realize that B2B brands were using podcasts as a place for bottom of funnel content to directly talk about the product.
Yeah, we don't advise against it. It's just they have to understand that it's not going to be a massive show. But yeah, if, for example, they can then have the salespeople put in outbound cadences to help support that, or if people have questions when they're in the sales process, sending them a podcast episode can help. It's probably 1% of clients have used the show for that purpose.
Yeah, amazing. Okay, good to know. Tom, a lot of gold has been shared today. I'd like to try and dissect the successes of my guests as much as possible for my listeners. But today I feel like I've learned a lot about what I can do better as I start rebooting this very podcast. So I do appreciate it. Before I let you go, one last question. And this is a question I like to ask all guests. What are you most jazzed about at the moment, whether that be in life or business?
Yeah, great question. And I think I recently read this book that I thought was going to be rubbish. It was called 10x is better than 2x by Dan Sullivan's concept, but it's written by an author whose name I can't remember. And what it basically says is that as an entrepreneur, you should just be continually focusing on the 20% of the work that gets the most results and it's your unique ability. And I actually have read it twice now and it makes so much sense to me because as a solo founder that's bootstrapped, you're always thinking, what should I be doing with my time? Now I am very clear what my unique ability is, and that's the 20%. So then I'm trying to delegate the rest because hopefully going to grow the business because that's where I'm most effective. And then after a couple of years, I then take the 20% of that 20%, cover the 80%, and I just keep honing in on the thing that I'm the best at. And that's how I can add the most value, but also enjoy myself the most. And so that's liberated me to get rid of the stuff that I've had to do, or I think that I've had to do, but I don't really enjoy. And there's other people in the world that are much better at doing it. That's the thing in the last month that's made me the most excited.
Amazing. What is your 20% out of interest?
Yeah, my unique ability, I've refined it. I'm pretty sure this is it, but it's basically consuming, synthesizing or thinking about, and then producing information around B2B marketing And in the future, it'll probably be more broader than that, like entrepreneurship, etc. And then distributing that information, both like external to business, but also internal. So a big part of my role is training the people that we have in order to run podcasts. That's what I find that I just enjoy the most. And it's also where I've had feedback where people say, okay, you're pretty good at that. So it's consuming, synthesizing, and producing content around B2B marketing for internal and external purposes.
Yeah, I've noticed on LinkedIn you're a big proponent of documenting everything. That checks out. Tom, really appreciate you sharing everything today. One last thing, where can listeners learn more about you and find you?
LinkedIn, I think, is the best place. Just DM me on LinkedIn. And then obviously fame.so is the podcast agency.
Tom, thank you again. I appreciate it.
My pleasure, Tom. Thank you for having me.